All right, this is going to be more of a speed build. We're going to go ahead and try to single take a slipper build. Um, just starting with a pre-soldered kit, just to help people see how we're assembling them these days. So this is all the tools I think we could possibly need. This is exactly what comes out of a typical bag if you order a slipper kit. Usually it ships with the wheels in there. This stuff would all be separate. You'll have your aluminum rod, your paper clip, your screws. We send a hex driver, but won't be needing the 1.3. But these Wera Hex Plus 1.5s are really nice to have. Actually, probably won't even need anything else. So let's do this. You'll notice that the tapers are there intentionally. So there's a right and a left, and when the bot's pointing forward, this is obviously the right side, left side. A lot of the building tends to be done from the other direction. We've got our micro servo adapter, our link, our spacers. When you get a pre-soldered kit, depending on whether you got it with a radio, you may have a radio with it. We'll go ahead and unbox a FlaSky FSI 6. You can also use Turnigy Evolutions. So here's a brand new out of the box FSI 6. And we'll go through some of the setup on that also. So start, put the batteries in it. So anytime that you turn one on, all those sticks have to be up. This has to be down. If not, it'll tell you, switches up, stick down. Go ahead and just verify our harness real quick. So plug the battery in, looking for the right shape. It should also be red to red. So battery, we'll go ahead and plug in the motors. So in general, these will be red to red also, but could be swapped. Every now and then we get wires that are wired differently. It doesn't really matter because with the Malenki we can always reverse channels in the Malenki and or in the radio. We'll say sometimes you have to do both. And then for this build, we're assembling with the StarterBot servo. Nearly as fast and strong and robust as a KST, but it has stall protection. So if you stall it for more than 2 or 3 seconds, it'll temporarily turn off until it gets another signal. But for generally kids, well, then again, also adults that tend to clamp for a long time, instead of getting super hot right away, it'll turn off and you'll have to move the stick again and keep going. So for a lot of people, they don't even actually notice, but they tend to not get quite as hot as the others. KSTs still survive all the heat, but often it's better not to get so hot. So when we set these up for a slipper, generally we'll be using that one at full length. It'll go in there and it'll flip that way. Don't know where it is yet, so we'll go ahead and plug this in. You can plug servo wires in backwards, so make sure you're yellow to yellow, brown to brown. As you can see there. Now, with a fresh Malenki, when we turn this on, we'll get red and flashing blue. To bind an FSI 6, hold the bind key. It says bind key down there. When you turn it on, binding, okay. So it was that fast. So generally that won't actually work until you move the motor stick. Actually takes it out of configuration mode. So see the motors are spinning, servo's moving. With the servo, the flipper arm goes that way. So with this all the way down, left stick all the way down, we'll want that pretty far forward. So I have high confidence that that will cover the full range of sweep that we want to do. We'll go ahead and put it into the micro servo adapter. So even I often have to think about how exactly does this go. So the micro servo adapter goes in, flanges down and this way, so that'll slide in right there. So you just gently split that to fit around it, and then we'll mount the servo to the micro servo adapter first. And you can use the self-tapping screws that come with it and a Phillips, or you can use the hex drive that we provide. I like trying to keep everything where we only use one tool. The servo horn screw is Phillips drive, but that should be the only one, and we're going to put it in there pretty tight. So I'm snugking these up pretty well. You got to remember they are only in the plastic, but these servos do put out a lot of force and they get warm, so I want them really quite snug. Every now and then we hear that people struggle to run these screws in. So when we do class kits, we'll send out a couple of these 1/16 on the hex shank that you can just turn in by hand. Generally, if you run them on the drill, you can, if you needed to, you could kind of intentionally wallow out the hole a little bit. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and get that pretty snug. You can see a little bit of strain showing there, so that is fully tight. The servo is going to mount right here. Just route the wire like that. So again, that'll go there. Should comfortably reach to that, and then when it's all the way up, it's going to push it all the way back. Yeah, we should be good. So I'm going to go ahead. You know what? Let's go back one more spline. So the way the arms will go, they'll be mounted here. Yep, that's plenty of travel. So now that we know that, we can go ahead and turn this off. I do like to go ahead and disconnect the battery just so I don't have to worry about anything being hot, meaning on when I touch it. Pull this out too. So like I said, I've got the horn where I want it now. Now, servo screws are an interesting animal. They often have non-published thread pitches. We'll work on collecting those, but in general, do your best not to lose a servo horn screw. So in general, they're not readily available. We can go ahead and turn this off for now. So I'm going to go ahead and make this pretty darn tight. It is nearly a steel screw going into a steel gear, so we want that pretty good and snug. Then we will go ahead and mount the servo itself. It is nice and easy to mount this when there's nothing else in place. So you may have noticed that funny little notch. Well, that's what we call design for manufacture. I made it so that you get a pretty good straight line to this. And again, you do want it fully snug, but it's just into plastic, so don't strip it, but get it good and tight. So this is one of the main advantages of installing the servo when the motors aren't there, is you get a really good straight shot. Worst case, it's up there, but it's slightly less angle when you can go through the motor port. So that's the servo fully locked down. Next, do you like to go ahead and get the battery in? So some people know that there was a kind of an extreme shortage of 2S 300 milliamp hour LiPos for a little while, and we had these made for us, and they made them with the balance lead about 4 millimeters shorter than what we had agreed to, but we needed something. So when you have these, it can be a bit of a stretch to fit into here, but it's worth it because it makes it so easy to charge. It's still always a good idea to charge in a LiPo bag, but these bots are small enough you can throw the whole bot in a LiPo bag. The mount is necessarily quite tight to hold that, so it makes it real easy to plug in. We send all of our chargers with an extension lead, so you just plug it in there to charge it, and pull it out to run. So I've got the black wire being kind of the bottom there, and this will run along, and it's actually going to tuck in between the battery and there, but we'll be doing that once we get the switch in. So give you an idea how this all goes in. That tucks in there like that. Like I said, that black wire is pretty tight like that. The next batch will all be 4 millimeters longer, but we do like these batteries. All right, so next we will go ahead and put the harness in. This you can go ahead and curl up in here. If you ever do need weight, slippers generally have plenty of room on weight, but if you go ahead and get creative with plow or armor, there's several grams of trimmable servo wire there. We like to make it easy to swap out in case you need it. So Malenki is going to sit right in there. The power comes across the top. Switch will tuck down into the switch mount, but what we're going to do first is look at how we're going to route our motor wires. So you see the W, L, and R. So R is the right side. Again, that's this one. So we like to have it, you can see what RPM is laser engraved in the top of the motor. And generally, we give some extra slack on the right side motor wires. So our left side is going to be this motor connector sits more towards the back. The right side motor connector, we use that slack to make a loop so that we're not turning it real tight, and then the servo connector wire is going to go there. So there are motor retention features. One of our first events, we had an undercutter. This is many years ago, before we had motor retention features. We, like many people did, just zip tied the motors in. We had an undercutter that clipped the zip ties out, and then the motors tilt up and the chassis hits the ground and you're stuck, you lose. So the motor retention features are actually enough to hold the motors in entirely, but you don't want to damage them by just straight pressing this in, and particularly if you put this down flat. So what we do is we flex the chassis open just a smidge and kind of share that. So you don't want to strain the chassis at the bottom. You don't want to damage those motor retention features. That one went in quite nice. We'll do the same thing on the other side, where we flex the chassis a smidge and we push it past the retention features. Now, it's in quite solid. Like, you don't need zip ties. Plus, the top armor, when you put those in, it actually helps clamp that so that these can't come out. We do still also add zip ties, just kind of as a final backup. So you can see that these guys should have plenty of slack between those. Go ahead and plug that servo back in. Again, being aware of brown to brown, yellow to yellow. don't know if I said it in this video yet, but you can physically put those in backwards. So you do need to be aware of that. I like to have my servo connector nice and tight right next to the servo. It just generally lets it be tidy in there. Those you can just jam in for now. Like I said, the Malenki's going to go there. The power wires we route to the corner to kind of give us room if we need to get the battery out. That's why those wires are that long. You can go ahead and plug this in. So we'll be tucking the battery connector down between the battery and the switch. That also helps hold that charging mount in, making it secure so you can easily charge all day while you're competing. I'll tuck that down in there. The Lenki will go there. The switch mount goes in front. Like that. Route those to the corner there. The switch mounts kind of intentionally loose so that they don't hang down. You can super glue them in place, you can hot glue them in place. All of our kits tend to ship with a little bit of this blue tack or fun tack. I generally just put a bead of this around the switch, and that's enough to hold it in place. You don't want the switch to stick down too far because then it could drag or get hit, and you don't want to stick up too far either. So I usually soft hold it in place like that. What that lets me do is when I turn it on and off, I can kind of set it with my thumb to make sure that it's recessed but reachable. Being fully competitive, we try to keep them as low as they can be, so they're very compact. Malenki does actually have to be on an angle, and the top armor will hold it there, everything nice and snug so that it doesn't get knocked around too much. So that's actually fully assembled. As far as the bot itself, we can always verify it by turning it on, and so you can see when so that's backwards, that's correct. So we need the reverse channel too. So if the radio's been on for a minute, you have to push OK again to kind of wake it up, and you'll hold OK, go to setup, and then you can go to reverse, and it was forward and backward that needs to be reversed. So we'll go to 2 and switch that. Now forwards, forwards, backwards, backwards. Left is left and right is right. So with these, you have to hold cancel to save that. So now we're still forward, backward, left, and right. Correct. While we're in here, it's brand new, so we haven't set it up yet. You'll see the RX battery shows full right there. That's just the default setting. So again, hold OK, go into system, go into RX setup, RX battery. So you can't raise any of these above what's below them. So you have to start here and raise it up first. So I like to be able to see the full range. So I'm going to set high to 8.5. So it would probably never be up there. The alarm, really don't want to run a LiPo under 3.6 volts per cell. So with a 2S battery, I'm going to set that at 7.2 volts. And like I said, I want to be able to see the full range. So I'm going to set this at 6.8, which is 3.4 per cell. And it should not be down there for any length of time. So this is a brand new battery, still on storage charge, 7.7 volts total, and you can see it's sitting there right in the middle. So go ahead and turn that off, and we'll go ahead and build up the arm assembly. And let's go ahead and put the zip ties in first, just because it tends to be something I forget. So, like I said, the zip ties are not entirely necessary, but always good for backup. Often I try to use the tails, so I'm going to use the tails to kind of hold the wires down, so I want this one to be like that. So we'll put this down around just the motor, not catching any wires. On the front, bring it up here. Run that through there. You do want these to be tight. It's nice to have it with a real rigid motor mount. Like I said, those retention features do a pretty good job, but it'd be hard to argue for being such a thing as too precise a driveline. The orientation matters less on this side, but might as well make it mostly match. Often I'll leave this one just kind of pointing straight up. I do often pull those till they tear away. Zip ties can be sharp, so keep people from scratching themselves. We'll usually snip these with flash cutters, take care to avoid snipping those wires, and always wear safety glasses if you're clipping anything. So those are locked in place quite well now. We're going to leave the wheels off until we set up the whole arm, because it's much easier to put the paper clip in without the wheels on. So for the arm setup, will be like that. Now, I have to admit, even though I designed it, I do often have to double check and make sure that the long spacer is on the right. I was pretty sure, but always worth making sure. So yeah, like that. So on the aluminum rod, now we print these with this side flat on the bed. If there's any elephant foot closing that, we kind of like that because it retains the aluminum rod, keeps it from going all the way out. So what we'll do is we'll assemble this like a sandwich, and then that feature will kind of help keep the aluminum rod from being able to push out on either side. So it's the long one. The hook on these reaches down slightly, kind of intentionally to reach around the servo horn just a bit. Then the short spacer, then the long spacer. We'll verify that's going to go nicely in there. You do always want to make sure that this should move very freely. If it doesn't, you can run a number 31 drill bit through it and get that fully opened up. To keep these, now a lot of times you will have the aluminum rod will take some force to press in there. As long as it presses in and goes near flush, that's okay. If it doesn't, you can use that 31 and kind of thread it in and then thread it back out, kind of intentionally leaving threads in there that'll hold that aluminum rod very securely. This one, because it moves so freely, we'll go ahead and put the top armor on here so it doesn't come back apart on us. So this top armor is really just keeping things out from inside and keeping this assembly the correct width. So you don't have to go nuts screwing this down. It really is just holding it in place. So you want it to be snug so that the screw is clamped enough not to walk itself back out, but it doesn't have to be more than that. So that'll go there. Let's see, what color plow should we put on this one? I do like the orange and purple, but I think this one might just go well with the gray. We'll go ahead and install this part first before we... I don't know. I like putting the plow on. So if you look in the plow, you'll see that these retaining features there that actually hold the arms themselves. And that also makes it much easier to keep the arms aligned as you screw it in. So it's still never a bad idea to check on what you're screwing to make sure that you're not pushing one part away from the other. So I'm kind of looking into that gap to make sure that it is. And I want them to be tight to where there's some clamp, but not tight enough that it deforms it and warps it, because I want that front edge to be as good and flat as I can get it. Same thing here. Gotta keep an eye on that to make sure it's staying nice and flush. We'll go snug. It should be slightly recessed, but not enough to warp it. Put the other two in later. So that guy's gonna go there. For the paper clip, we go ahead and straighten it out pretty straight until excuse me, until the end, like so. So go through, and the first thing we're gonna do is get the length, so we don't need to feed it through the arm yet. So better that this be slightly too short than too long, so you don't want this to stick out and catch the wheels or scratch anybody. What I generally do is I'll pull it slightly sub-level there, maybe even a little bit more than that, then give it a bend. I know where that is. Now, these paper clips are large, but not made of any kind of hardened material. If you're using a different kind of paper clip, you want to be aware of what you cut it with. You don't want to damage the blades. What I'll usually do is I'll put a V-bend in the end that'll go into here to retain it. So usually right about there. Just kick it up maybe 10 degrees, kick it back down, and flatten it back out. And that little V-bend will actually give an impressive amount of retention into the side. It should keep this from ever walking out. This upright is good and snug too, so that'll help. You do want the plow to pivot freely on the paper clip, so if necessary you could run a drill bit through there. It's generally not necessary though. So you don't want to end up stabbing yourself in the thumb with the paper clip, so that's one thing to be aware of. And you don't want to mangle it, so even if you need to use a lot of force, I really like to grab close to where I'm going and only go in a little bit at a time. What you don't want to do is end up jamming this thing through there and into your thumb. I know that this one's not even long enough to do that, but so I could push right here, but I really like where I'm pushing it in there, keeping my thumb out of the way, and just enough at a time. So subflush on that side, subflush on that side. It took some force to move, so I feel good that it's not going to walk its way out. Next thing we can connect is right there. Those are already zip tied in, so I feel pretty good about that. Though with this out of the way, let's go ahead and put the wheels on. So retaining wheels is always a challenge. And we found even with the most consistent filament that we can buy, generally it's still rated at plus or minus 0.01 millimeters tolerance. Well, 0.01, 0.02 is actually enough that it can make these pretty loose or pretty tight. So we print them all tight and we actually press them on a mandrel. And we want them to be tight to the motors so they don't come off. In competition, we'll put a little dab of super glue on the end, press these on, and then actually spray the activator through it to really lock it in place. If you're going to be really serious about it, you can use a diamond file to file a notch in there, and that'll actually really engage that shaft well. For this, in case they decide that they want to change them, we're not going to glue them on. So this is a D flat. Be aware of where that flat is. You can see the flat right here on this side, and I'm going to line those up and push it on. And what I don't want to do is just jam this thing on there, because that puts all the pressure on the mount itself. I really want to be pinching it. So that I'm not mangling the chassis. So it should hit its stop while there's still visible clearance between the tire and the chassis. Just like that. So same thing on the other side. Got my D flat up, D flat. Go ahead and pinch there. Try to make sure that the vast majority of my force is actually kind of a pinching motion of the motor and the gearbox. And those wheels, I mean, they should take a real lick before they come off. Next up will be that one. So again, standard hex screw. And these particular servo horns have been a little bit tight. So I'm going to go ahead and just use that 1/16. Just that little bit. So I will spin this one to clear it. That tends to make our standard M2 go through